Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Back from the train is our good friend Mark Ostrander. GT is on assignment doing Nike and Grandview things. Marco, long time no see. How are you, man?
Good. A lot of stuff going on. I do want to ask you something before we get too in depth in this. You had an interview Monday with Kenny Monday that should be coming out here in the next today or tomorrow. How'd that go? Tell me a little bit about that, so people are going to understand what they're going to be watching.
Kenny's really an interesting guy. I think you and I had talked off air about how he's been in so many situations, and he brought up a couple situations that I forgot, that he had been a part of Bobby Douglas's staff for a couple years, that he coached alongside John Smith when they were both super early in their coaching careers, that, he's been coached by Dan Gable, and you know how those things are. Like, I coach an all-star team every year. You coach a guy for 3 weeks. You certainly don't claim that you've coached them, but you've had a chance to, sort of mentally touch them. He talked a lot about how he took notes over the years, that he's got a notebook literally of, I think it's probably 80-20. I didn't ask him this, but of what to do versus what not to do. You learn a lot of, when I started getting good at recruiting, Mark, you're one of the guys I called, and that was a what to do. Terry Pack, what to do. Lee Pritz, what to do. And you also watch people that aren't very good at it, and you're like, okay, I can't do that, right? That didn't work for me, or like negative recruiting, talking bad about other programs. So that was interesting. He talked a lot about the outpouring of the community. He talked about how he was originally a part of the search committee, and
for this job, the job he's at. Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. He talked about the timing of it with his sons, and we talked about the historical context of what he's doing. This is not just another guy getting another job. And this is not like, so to compare it, I don't think it's like Nate Carr Jr. getting the job at Davidson. Like Davidson, with all due respect, hasn't been, like a ton of All-Americans every year, a ton of national qualifiers every year. I think Nate will do great things, but if he doesn't, and he uses that as a springboard to get to another job or whatever else, no one's going to say it's a job. This Morgan State thing it's a mushroom effect. Like, it's got to go well, because the goal is to bring back other HBCUs, which stands for historically Black colleges and universities. There's a lot of context there. Kenny and I have known each other a long time. He recruited me coming out of high school. I'm on the advisory board of BWA, so I'm on all those Zoom calls. Jahi Jones and I put together the initial gala that we did down at Junior Duels a year and a half ago. And so I know Kenny. It wasn't like it was hard to reach him. It was a very familiar conversation, which I think is the people that watch that podcast. I think it's very much like us, Mark, like you and me talk. We talk to Grant. It's not super formal. And, I'm going to read 12 questions to you. It's just two people talking, or in our case, three people talking. And I know you actually have experience with Kenny, right? Like, you wrestled him your freshman year.
Oh yeah. You remember that story, don't you? Yeah, I did.
Well, listen,
you didn't bring that up in the interview, did you? He doesn't remember me, I'm sure.
No, but it is funny because, like, a couple weeks ago, I was at the Beach Nationals, and Wes Roper, his son Austin, basically runs that thing. And, Wes was a great wrestler, like a 3 or 4 time All-American from Missouri, great wrestling coach at Mizzou. Took over after Bob Komniski and into the Brian Smith era. And listen, he was way better wrestler than I was, but he never won nationals. And I don't even think he ever made the finals of the Big 12, but it was because he was in the same bracket as Kenny Monday, Nate Carr, and Roger Frizzell. And then he talks about how one year he decided to move up and he ran into Mike Sheets and Dave Schultz. So I don't want to be, the old guy on the porch saying like, oh, these guys were better back then than they are now. I don't think that's true. I think wrestling evolves and everybody keeps getting better, like I think it's like everything. But Wes Roper came along at the wrong time. Like if he had been a few years earlier, a few years later, I'm not saying he would have won nationals, but he would not have been fourth in the Big 12s kind of thing, So
didn't Kenny lose his senior year in the Big 12s in the finals of the Big 12s?
He lost almost every year. Or no, I'm sorry. He would win the Big 12s, and then Nate Carr would beat him at nationals. Like Nate Carr would do.
I thought for some reason the senior year he lost to a Missouri guy that got inducted to the Missouri Hall of Fame.
Oh, Sonderegger. John
Yes,
Sonderegger.
am I wrong? Am I wrong with that?
So, okay, so John Sonderegger is actually a junior college guy from here in St. Louis.
Yep.
He did lose to Sonderegger beat Kenny Monday at one point. I can't remember if it was Big 8s back then, just so people don't think.
Okay. Yeah.
No, but I'm just saying if we use different terminology, that's what it was called back then. And they only had 4 or 5 schools that wrestled, but they were just all freaking really good. That's when OU was in the top 10 and O State and Iowa State. And so like Nate Carr used to do the Guerrero where he wouldn't win the conference and then win the nationals, Like, I don't know if Guerrero ever won the Big 8s or Big 12s, but he's a 3-time national champ. Nate Carr was a 3-time national champ, and I think he only won it once, maybe. And then, Kenny only won 1 national title. But he also talked a little bit about jumping levels. I asked him a question that, hang on, this is Grant right here. So, I asked him a question that I think I'm going to start asking people more. I asked him, what did he think was an important, like, what is the mindset? What are some of the things that a champion must have? Okay. So like, I mean, we're going to get to some stuff today, but it's a pretty slow week. This might be the slowest week we've ever had. So we kind of got time to talk about this. So like last night, Serena Williams is playing. We're recording this on Thursday morning. So if for the 7 people that don't know, Serena Williams plays tennis and is the GOAT. She's the greatest of all time. And she's 41 years old. And I think she's won 23 Grand Slam titles in singles and God knows how many in doubles. And the King Richard movies about their family, her and Venus. But she played the number 2 woman in the world last night and beat her. And, when they ask her, like, were you surprised? She goes, I'm pretty good too. Like there's a certain mentality, Mark, like I want to say this as a compliment. There's an arrogance. When you were running those teams at Iowa Central and 5th was a bad year, there's an arrogance to that. There's you and me used to try to beat each other's brains out in coaching, not really recruiting. I wasn't recruiting, but, like, you coached against me. We coached against each other. And I mean, it's a very cool sort of Lacuna Matata full circle, how good of friends we are now. But for us, you were better than us at the time. So like us, if we could beat Iowa Central, that was a benchmark. It's kind of like Illinois Greco, like if you can beat Illinois Greco, or even last year when Iowa won junior duels and they beat Illinois, they're like, Illinois is the gold standard. There are certain things like that. Like right now, beating Penn State in collegiate wrestling, that's the gold standard. Beating Alabama in football, that's the gold standard. So Kenny was interesting. He didn't give me the answer I thought he would. And I want people, it was a really good answer, just wasn't what I thought, So I have this phrase about people that I really like that are smart, and I call it intellectual generosity, where people share what they know, what they're good at, and they don't filter it. They don't hold back. And I think that's a combination of how good of a person the person that you're getting that information from is. And I think it's also the level of the relationship, right? Like when I wanted to get good at recruiting, you're one of the guys I called. And I mean, I don't know if you remember the conversation, but I remember the conversation. I remember saying, how'd you get all those guys? What'd you do? Like, what was your process? You could have told me anything and I would have listened. You could have told me a portion of the truth. You could have told me, frankly, a bunch of BS, a bunch of crap that wasn't true. And you told me, you gave me the playbook, and, and I think I asked very specific questions, like, how do you talk to these guys when they're from this situation? So how generous people are is a gift that we should not take for granted. Grant Turner, who can't be with us today, just texted, he goes, he's in Portland. Like, his knowledge base and how much he shares with us and our audience every week, your experience, all the things you've been through as an athlete and as a coach, and how many people you've mentored in life. Me becoming such good friends with you that I'm at your son's wedding. Like, these are things that matter in life. And I think as I get older, I appreciate that more. It's not how many it's how much you won matters to a certain extent, but I just, Kenny was great, to go back to it. So, we talked about putting staff together. We talked about what he's good at, not good at, where he'll fill in gaps, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And
when can they compete? Are they taking 2 years?
23, 24.
23, 24. Okay.
So he's basically recruiting now against everybody else.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they're fully funded. Mike Novogratz had a huge impact on that, that they're endowed. That's the other thing which we didn't get into, but I didn't think it was the most interesting part to talk about, but I believe they're structured much differently than Fresno State. I can tell you this now. When Fresno State came out, Eric Guerrero and I were really good friends, and we were going through this, and he's like, I don't want that job. And I'm like, you'd be perfect for it. You're a national champion. You come from a great coaching tree. You're a California native. You're Hispanic. You have a lot of ties out there. Your name would be good for recruiting. And he told me, he goes, they've only funded it for 5 years. They haven't endowed it. He goes, I really think that program won't exist in 5 years. Because I'm hoping it does. But it's like a lot of things, right? Like, you're a parent. You hope your son makes a good decision. That nobody's kid's bat 1,000, right? Like, hey, I hope that he comes home on time and doesn't break curfew, but he's at a party and he might not. So I think they're set up much stronger, much with a lot more stability. And I think that's important. There's people that probably don't want them to succeed, for wrong reasons, for bad reasons, right?
Sure.
And he also talked about, he goes, there's a ton of coaches that said, hey, we hope you take second at nationals. Like, they want to beat you. And I said, I think you're probably like the military academies in that sense. Like when you see a West Point or a Navy athlete, like on the podium, making the finals, like the whole crowd cheers.
Yep.
But wrestling people are good like that. When Little Rock had their first national qualifier, there's a standing ovation.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he won a match. They might have scored a point, maybe a half a point. No disrespect. When you start a program from nothing, that's the steps you take. So shout out to Neil and his crew. But I'm saying, like, it's a thing that I think we appreciate the struggle. Wrestling people appreciate the struggle. A lot of people have been sending me like these Joe Rogan podcast clips, and he talks about the mentality of wrestlers. I don't think it's new to you or me, right? Like, you wrestled most of your life. I wrestled most of my life. You coach. But he talked about, for example, the mentality of wrestling versus jiu-jitsu, which I thought was really interesting because, like, jiu-jitsu is much more, it's a literally laid back sport. You're on your back. There's no shame in submitting. It's actually the smart thing to do, right?
Yeah.
In wrestling, so think about this. I've talked for too long, so I'm going to get trimmed, but imagine you're coaching and Tony Davis is wrestling me and he puts in the legs and he has me in a power half and I'm about to go and I just tap. would your reaction be?
I've never seen that happen, so
Yeah.
I'm not, so I wouldn't have any idea. All I know is that either that arm was going to snap and you felt it. So, I mean, I've been in I've been in the complete opposite situations, Dave's, where I'd have kids like Cain Velasquez or Paul Jen. These are two kids that come to mind now at the national tournament. They're wrestling. They're down by 8 points at the end of the first period. And the competitor looks over at our side and kind of winks and smiles. And I said, dude, this thing hasn't even started yet. And that's what I'd say to him. And he'd, what? And, we beat both of them by majors. Just broke them,
Yeah, run them down, right?
Absolutely snapped them in half. And then they come over with their heads down and said, that was disrespectful. I'm sorry, coach. I mean, that was their attitude.
There's so many layers to that, right?
Yeah.
There's so many layers to that. There's the layer of the opposing athlete who owned his own behavior, which in the moment, I mean, there's a wink is pretty low on the forms of disrespect, right? It's not like he's, giving you an obscene gesture, using profanity with you, even just verbally talking junk to you. Then there's the whole concept, and this goes to a different thing, which I think is actually fascinating. You and me talked about this. It goes to what are the most important parts of wrestling and how different people around the world view it. So, like in America, conditioning is a very big part of our sport, right? Like in jiu-jitsu, I remember I was at the Worlds the first year cutting weight. And I'm trying to remember. No, it was the second year, because my mom and dad weren't with me. Second year. I was cutting weight. I had a big thick hoodie on. I'm just on an elliptical, just trying to knock off a couple pounds, just, because I got to fight that day. And you have to make weight mat side. So I was trying to get under so that I could eat and drink and feel good, and these two Brazilian guys walk by and they go, "Oh, you fight today?" I go, "Yeah, but fight, yeah, And he goes, "You wrestler?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Stupid wrestler." Like, that's what they said. Like you don't cut weight. Like, that's a thing. So I think that's a different mentality between wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And then I think there's this whole thing, like I've been blessed with Matt Chat to talk to all these different people, and they talk about how in other parts of the world, it's okay to lose because you got tired. And I don't think that it's okay to lose in America because you got tired. Like, I mean, how many of us as coaches have said, look, man, the worst guy makes weight and the worst guy can still go hard in the third period, in folk style or second period freestyle. And guy, because we coach guys our whole time, but the worst wrestler can do those two things, make weight and go hard. I mean, that's certainly a mentality in the state of Iowa, isn't it?
Probably not the worst wrestler part of it, but yeah. I mean, you're out there for 7 minutes and you want to be wrestling like you want to be out there for 30 minutes. So you don't get
in a way that's more positive instead of the worst wrestler. You respect, like when you're done, you've coached a million guys, you had athletes, that you had teammates. Some of the guys you respect the most weren't great, but they showed up on time, they made weight every time, and they were fighting at the very end, win, lose, or draw. They never just said, I got tired, I'm packing it in.
Yes.
And
I mean, I actually coaching, David, I was more proud, and this is kind of a sad thing to say, but I was so proud of the kids that came back and got third at tournaments, not just nationals, but at, the UNO Open, some of the big tournaments back in the day that we wrestled in, kids that would get beat early and come back and get third. I mean, it just showed you their determination. You just loved having those kids in the room because all they wanted to do was wrestle. It wasn't win-lose for them. It was just, I want to keep competing. And if I lose this match, I'm done for the day. I want to keep wrestling. And that's kind of what their mentality was.
Yeah, so I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. I think that's awesome. And I don't think there's ever been a time where the Nationals were only one on the front side of the bracket. Like even last year, Penn State with other champions, they don't win without Kirk Fleet.
Sure.
maybe mathematically they do, but in general, like, look, you have to have, the opposite side of that is Minnesota and didn't have a champion and won it with 10 All-Americans. So
you do see it so much more. It's more prevalent today, David, in some of these bigger tournaments where guys will get knocked out and they just default out of the tournament. They won't wrestle anymore. And it doesn't have anything to do with injuries. I didn't win it, so why go out there and do it? And that bothers me. I mean, it's really hard to watch. So
that's a whole different mentality too. And you could talk about how that goes forward in life, right? Like, hey, if I don't get the best client, I quit. If I don't take first place, I quit. But some of the guys that I've talked to that have coached overseas, coached against overseas teams, talk about how, like, it's not shameful to lose. If you lose on cardio, which I think
it's an odd philosophy. Losing's losing. If you're losing just because you got tired, how can you be proud of that?
I think the argument, okay, let me start by saying, I'm just doing it as.
Oh, I understand.
The podcast is much more interesting when we disagree than agree, okay? So for the sake of argument, I think the point is, okay, I'm more skilled than you. Okay, I know more techniques. I won the first period. I hit the slickest move. All you did was just not get tired. And like, well, okay, but that's like the tortoise and the hare, right? It's like, who wins the race?
Yep.
And obviously when you coach, you're trying to coach skill, you're trying to coach tactics, you're trying to coach mindset, and you're obviously coaching conditioning. There's probably more things, but at least those. But it's kind of like 4 legs to a table, right? And if you just say, well, one of the legs to the table doesn't matter, to me, so here's a very interesting one to me and recent. David Taylor got Yazdani Charati tired at the Olympics and ran him down and scored late and beat him.
On a double leg.
Yeah.
Something you don't see very often from David Taylor. That's what he
you'd expect an ankle pick. Right. Yeah. Okay, but got him tired. At the Worlds, so the Olympics were 2020, but they were really August of 21. And the Worlds, I think, were October or November of 21. Yeah, Yazdani didn't get tired. And he won the first period like he normally does, and just Taylor couldn't reel him in. So now the next version of that, Worlds are in 10 days, 9 days. And now it's like, okay, if you're coaching Taylor, you're like, look, probably can't give that guy as big of a lead. Or we have to make the pace really high. But the danger of making the pace really high is you put people in a bunch of scrambles. Now, again, if you're coaching David Taylor, that probably doesn't scare you in general. But in general, like, if you're better than me and I go, we're just going to get in a bunch of scrambles, now I'm like the guy that Paul Jen ran down. Like, I'm down 9 or 10. And you're really good. So it's going to take a lot, and especially if, let's say, one of those moves was like a feet to back for 6. And you were just holding me there for a minute and a half, you're probably not as tired as if it was 9 takedowns. Like 9 takedowns will get you tired even if you got them.
Yep.
So it's a interesting philosophy, but I think philosophy is kind of what governs your practice. Like when you did Match Chat with me, we interviewed Seabolt and Fellers. Like, you can tell they're part of their philosophy. You just get out there and grind, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I don't know. I did like, and then there's the whole different styles, like, the Japanese style of wrestling versus like the Cuban style wrestling versus the Russian style wrestling. I've mentioned this before, but I got to talk to Bill Zadek, Joe Russell, James Green at the U.S. Open and sit with them for a couple of hours during the semis, and while we're watching them together. And they were basically watching, and Matt Collin, my buddy who's an Iowa Central guy, and I got to watch with them. And it was fascinating. Just, you know, anything from they shouldn't throw that brick to they should throw that brick to why does he keep putting himself on the edge to, it's basically the stuff. It's like the coolest part of being around smart people. It's like you and me watching wrestling and I'm learning from you. I'm like, what do you think? Those kind of things. And I think that's, yeah, anyway, so it's a very interesting thread. You started with Kenny. It should come out later today, which when this post will probably be tomorrow. So it'll come out a day ago. Yeah. So anyway, couple of other things. Troy Steiner takes over at the Gopher RTC, University of Minnesota. Thoughts? Iowa guy.
Great hire. Think he's been around long enough. He's been throughout, he's been involved with the USA wrestling programs, the club teams, RTCs. I think he's going to do a phenomenal job up in Minnesota. Minnesota's got a great program. It was set up so good 25, 30 years ago, and it just keeps doing a great job. So I think he's going to step right in, and I don't think you'll see them miss a beat. I really don't.
Yeah, I texted Schlater. I know him from we were working on Minnesota Border Brawl before we got COVIDed.
Yep.
Super nice. He's like sort of the definition of Minnesota nice, even though he's from Ohio. You wouldn't know talking to Dustin Schlater what a freaking hammer he was in wrestling and in life. And so it's interesting. I'm sure he's going into the private sector and will do very well. Most wrestling guys that worked really hard at one thing, if they find something they're halfway as passionate for, generally succeed at a pretty high level. So that's news. The Greco seeds came out. So last week, GT and I talked about men's and women's freestyle, and it was a timing issue. The Greco seeds hadn't come out when we recorded the podcast. I want to make sure that people understand that. Sure. So Max Nowry is the only seeded American at 4. And so, I won't beat this drum. I just think it's hard for us to be good at Greco based on the college situation and all that stuff, So, but, obviously there's change over there. I'm guessing Ivan's going to coach the team. I don't know.
Probably.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see. I think anytime you make a change, improvement is not always linear, to quote Kendall Cross. Like sometimes you got to get worse for a day or two to get better. And I know America wants to be really good at Greco. And if you're not getting the results you want, then you got to change something, right? Yep. I think for Greco, it really starts with recruiting, right? Like if you can get some of the best athletes, the guys that have won the most in collegiate to do Greco, you inherently would probably have a better chance or something. Some kids just know how to win. Like I take a guy like Yanni Diakomahalis who doesn't do a lot of upper body stuff, but that guy's a winner. I think he'd probably figure out how to win. I'd rather coach him than a guy that hasn't won a lot, just in general. So
I agree.
We can talk about this if you want. We can talk about a little more next week. Who's number 1 is coming up.
Okay.
It's in a week and a half, so we can talk about it. Let me see here. Share a tab. So we can just kind of hit on these. So Claire Bowie, Gigi Bragg, Jasmine Robinson, Michelle Rebish, Sarah Henkel, Zaina McBride, Didich, Lideker, Sean Perry, Evaldi Perez or Gomez, Moore, Little Soldier, Pastoriza, Turner, Garcia Hamilton, Gabby Gomez, Solario, and Scott Nicky and Ava Ward on the men's side. Or I guess boys' side. There's 2 matches of 160. They're going to do that, wrestle, and then winners.
4-man bracket. Yep.
Yeah. Ferrari Scholes, Ruiz Seeley, Webster Lemley, Knox Castillo, Block Nasser Bailey. Nasser Bailey just committed to Little Rock. Kasich, Mantanona, McGowan, Davino, Shapiro, Lockett, Thompson, Ryder, Forrest, Jessaroga, Josh Barr, Rocco Welch rematch of Fargo. So we got a few minutes left. Which of these matches are you super interested in?
Oh, well, I don't know a lot about the women. I mean, I've watched Gomez wrestle, obviously, out of Illinois. She's very impressive. So I think that should be fun to watch. McBride's awfully good. I just don't have a lot of knowledge on some of these young ladies, David. I'm more into the boys area, obviously. Jessaroga. I'm really looking forward to that because he went 1-2 against him to make the world team. Won the first match. I think he teched him, did a tech on him, and then just got in some scrambles where he didn't look comfortable. So this is going to be, collegiate style wrestling. This is not going to be freestyle. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how some of these guys do. I think McGowan and the kid from Illinois is going to be a great match too. I really do. And Lockett's phenomenally talented. Ryder's really good. They really put together a good group of kids. Ryder Block and Bailey out of Illinois. I know I've seen them wrestle. And it's always been really, really close. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you see interesting. So, like, Jax Forrest is
freshman this year.
Yeah, he's a young guy, and he's a Josh Kindig guy who I'm friends with. Ladarian Lockett wrestled in Border Brawl, and that's why he's not wrestling in it this year, because he's got this match and then Super 32. McGowan hasn't wrestled in a long time, so that'll be interesting. Christian Castillo, Flying Squirrel down at Pan Am, so him and Knox is interesting. Webster and Lemley have wrestled each other a bunch. I understand why they make that match. It's hard because these kids all go around everywhere. I think Angelo Ferrari is super interesting. He wrestled in Border Brawl last year. Could not have been a nicer kid. Could not have been an easier kid to work with.
Yep.
Yes or no, sir. Thank you for the gear. Thank you for inviting me. Had a great time. Can we get a picture? All that kind of stuff. But my understanding is they're in Texas. So he's, obviously all these kids are training, but he's not at Stillwater. So it'll be interesting to see how his cardio, there's a perfect example of a guy who just goes and goes and goes and goes and, beat Jordan Williams last year at state. And it was sort of a cardio match, a 1-1, but just tried to make it a long match as possible. These guys always do a great job. And again, I have nothing but respect for anybody who tries to run these events, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Like we had a kid this morning has hurt his ankle in practice. And, like now he can't wrestle in the meet. We got to go get another person at the last minute. Sure. Ava Ward's, I'll just, be a homer. She's a Missouri girl, really good. GT hopefully will come in next week as he knows this. I'll say this, Gigi Bragg wrestled in Michigan Border Brawl, Michelle Rebish Border Brawl. So a bunch of, the Michigan girls. And I'm really surprised that Sabrina Noss isn't in here. I don't know if they could have found a girl for her to wrestle, but she's from Michigan, so it would have been cool. But again, like I saw there was some podcast they did where they defended who wasn't in this meet, like Luke Lillidow or somebody like that, again, who's got a lot of St. Louis connections. His dad is a buddy of mine. I worked with Luke for a little bit when he was in grade school. Through the Extreme RTC. But
do you think, David, maybe he just needs a little break because he's been wrestling so much this summer?
I don't know. I don't know that. I know this. Like, he's certainly entitled to do whatever he wants, right?
Sure.
And the other thing is sometimes these guys have wrestled everybody. Like, like we mentioned, one or two of those matchups, we've seen them, right? Like Josh Barr, Rocco Welch was a great Fargo final.
Yep.
And like you mentioned, Jessaroga, It's different. It's folk style. It's not freestyle. It's a B1 match, not 2 out of 3. Maybe one of these guys is really good on top, and that's going to change it, right? Or was really good on top in freestyle, right? Like if you and me are super even on our feet, but you've got an unbelievable lace, you could tech me, and it might be it would probably be a lot closer in folk style, especially if you're a take him now, let him go guy, because now all those points literally just go away. So
Sure.
it'll be interesting to see. I know they're holding it in Michigan.
That's also, is that next week, David?
Next weekend. I think it's next Friday or Saturday night. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. I actually was talking to somebody from Flow yesterday because they're streaming Border Brawl. So, we're talking about promotional timing, and they're going to promote that. And then there's Worlds, and then our event comes up. So, like,
sure.
When you're Flow or track and you're literally doing everything, nothing stays on the front page for very long, Yeah. So I mean, that's just how it is, and that's the nature of it. It's very interesting that we've come from track to USA Wrestling, and I guess this is I want to really thank Justin Tritz for the opportunity that we had to get us started, and all the people that helped get us on the air there. It's nice now that if Flow is doing something good, or Intermat is doing something good, or Open Mat is doing something good, or Win is doing something good, or Amateur Wrestling News is doing something good, that there's no competition.
Sure.
Like we can say, hey, Joe Blow over at XYZ put up a great article. This is something you guys should probably read, that kind of thing. So it's a huge advantage of being at USA Wrestling. And so want to thank Gary Abbott and Rich Bender again for that opportunity. I think next week will be a massive preview of the Worlds.
Yep.
And then the week after that, we'll talk about the Worlds. The week after that, hopefully maybe we can preview Border Brawl a little bit with whatever else is going on. And then we'll probably start previewing weight classes.
Yep. Well, I'm sure some rankings are going to come out by then. So we'll get back into doing the rankings, which is always fun for me, because I enjoy doing, going through that and trying to figure out where people should be or where I think they should be. Obviously, these are our opinions and nobody else's. So we can disagree or we can agree.
Well, we can always give that disclaimer, that even when we did the rankings, it's like, look, like we always go through that scenario. Like if you were killing me and I reach back and pin you, and it's the first match of the year, I probably have to be ranked ahead of you within reason. And it doesn't mean anybody thinks I'm better than you. It doesn't mean 10 matches from now you won't be 9-1 and I won't be 5-5 and it'll switch. But in that moment, like this, who's number one matches, if something like that happens, the person that wins is going to be ranked number one. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the meet.
Yep.
So, anyway, anything else before we sign off?
No, I'm good. I wish Grant would have been here, but I know he's busy, and hopefully he'll be able to be on next week.
Well, it's the best pods are with the three of us. But once in a while, you and me just doing it old school, like you're talking about stuff is not a bad, it's not a bad 45 minutes for me. And I know everybody enjoys your perspective on everything. So anyway, for GT, who's on assignment, for Mark, who is here, I'm David. Thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll speak to y'all next week.